Welcome into Basketball by Association. This is your post-NBA Finals edition. My name is Arky. Shea. That is Joel C. Cortez. Joel, you know what it's all about. We got ourselves a world champion just like we all predicted 7 months ago.
Yeah, we were on top of that. Thank you, Golden State Warriors, for vindicating us the entire way. We will unpack the finals a little bit today. More importantly, though, this is the passing of the baton type of episode because we start to look forward to the offseason, the big storylines. The draft obviously is coming up. My favorite time, free agency, and the start of next season already. Before we do that, Arky Shea, this is episode 111, and we have to name it after a player who, if I tried to give you the biggest clue, you would guess right away. So I'm just going to run down his list of laurels and plaudits here. This is a current player. He's a 9-time All-Star, a 3-time assist champ, the 08-09 All-Rookie team member. He was the 2016-17 MVP, a 2-time scoring champ, 9-time All-NBA, a 2-time All-Star Game MVP, and yes, he was on the 75th anniversary team. He is still playing. He's got 111 playoff games.
I don't know, man. That I feel like a lot of those credentials sort of, like when I start thinking about that, see, 08, 09. Yeah, I don't know, man.
There's a lot. So here's what'll give it away. Despite all of those credentials, that huge list, he was arguably the most maligned player in the NBA last season.
Arguably.
It's not your boy Kyrie, so now we're really narrowing it down.
No, yeah, well, Kyrie's. I think Kyrie's a little bit later, isn't he? Like Kyrie's only like Kyrie was drafted in the teens, wasn't he? Like 2011 or something.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Who was maligned? Here's the thing: like the hate, like there's so many people that just bash on players just because it's fun.
No. But this guy was the soup du jour to bash against all last season, despite the fact that he's led the league in assists 3 times and is a 2-time scoring champ. And oh, by the way,
is that Harden?
Nope. This is Mr. Triple-Double himself, Russell Westbrook.
Russ Westbrook, okay.
Yeah, so you and I have...
now Russell Westbrook was beat up a lot last year, but yeah, I was trying to put together, like, Harden was crushed a ton last year, but yeah, Russell Westbrook was probably more. Kyrie was muck ducked the entire year, so I get that.
Yeah, but even Kyrie, all the bashing, like he eventually showed up, played well, and a lot of people, most was forgiven-ish.
Yeah, but like he took so much vitriol,
right?
But not from me, by the way. Okay, all right. So this is the Russell Westbrook edition.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do it because he's gotten a lot thrown his way. Some of it is self-inflicted. There's certainly a lot of
I like Russell
ego Westbrook that goes there. But yeah, you and I have talked about this for a couple seasons, how much fun peak Westbrook was, and even sub-peak Westbrook in Washington was phenomenal. Last year did not work with the Lakers. The outlook for a player like Russell Westbrook reinventing himself and having a phenomenal end of his career, it doesn't look great, but it's been done before, and you and I know, are both just kind of hoping that he turns this around and finds that new lane, that reinvention that allows us to enjoy him without all the shade being thrown his way. Because man, he's had a phenomenal career.
Did you say he has 2 scoring titles?
Yeah,
dude. I can't even. I wouldn't have guessed one time if I was just trying to remember, because he's such a triple-double machine.
In, let's see, what is this? 2016, 2017, he averaged 31.6 points per game. And in 24, 2015, he led the league with 28 per game, which seems low for a scoring champ, but there it is.
I was about to say, if you go a couple years before that, was probably peak Westbrook. Not triple-double average, but like I feel like, so many people talked about he just accumulated a bunch of those numbers, and we
And he's
dispute
averaged
that.
double-digit assists 5 times in his career.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of players who touch that. You're talking, obviously, John Stockton, Magic Johnson are way up there, but you're getting into Jason Kidd territory.
yeah.
Steve Nash territory, guys that did it multiple times. Chris Paul, obviously.
2015, 2019, that era of Westbrook is like special NBA player that I don't feel like gets as much credit. And maybe because he's just not as friendly with the media. He doesn't,
right.
Do all the appearances he wants to. Doesn't always speak kindly to everyone. Like he's a different cat. And so I think the nicer you are to media, the nicer they are to you and talk about you. And if not, then they'll just sort of put you away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So. All right, well that's it. Russell Westbrook, we dedicate this one to you, my friend, and we look forward to you hopefully going to many other coaches' press conferences as well, despite what most people think you should be doing. Joe, obviously the NBA championship has been wrapped. We can talk briefly about it. I don't have a ton extra to say other than I'm a little surprised about how easily Golden State was able to take over in Game 6 in Boston and win it that way. I thought it was going to be a long series, and yeah, I did waffle back and forth throughout the series based on what Boston was doing. But the biggest shocker to me in the series was the way they were able to clinch it in Game 6 in Boston. And kudos to Steph. He's your MVP. Like, the dude played like the best player on the court for the majority of those 6 games. So I don't have a lot of fault either way. I thought that was going to be the champion at the end of the year, and Steph Curry makes a whole bunch of sense based on how he played in those 6 games to be the champ, to be the guy.
Yeah, Boston got a huge Game 6 out of Jaylen Brown. We had talked about that leading in. They got a better out of Al Horford, which we had talked about as well. The unfortunate side for them is that Jason Tatum struggles. Golden State did a phenomenal job defending him. And you look at the Warriors side, they win a game scoring only 103 points. Yeah. Steph at 34, but no other Warrior was at the 20-point mark, although Wiggins was close. And just, walking away from that, there's now the offseason story around this is going to be, well, where does Steph Curry rank in the pantheon of NBA players now that he's got 5?
Why do we always have to rank everybody immediately, right? Like, that's
right.
just our thing. Like, yeah.
But I will say this. For anybody who's throwing shade and saying he doesn't belong in top 10 all time, you're running out of time to make that argument with a straight face because of the longevity records and the volume records that he's set when it comes to threes and shooting and scoring and all that stuff. The fact that he's got 5 rings, you're running out of time. There's a good chance that Golden State gets at least one more during his career, which puts him on.
Steve Kerr literally said, and granted, it's just,
right,
whatever. You think they can be better next year, and I don't think he's wrong, by the way.
I agree with that as well, and that's an off-season topic we will definitely dig into. But yeah, you talk about James Wiseman coming back, Jonathan Kuminga getting another year under his belt. Yeah. Some of those other guys who they're going to be able to keep under contract for at least another year or two, Jordan Poole, Damian Lee will be back, Juan Toscano-Anderson. Some of the older guys like Otto Porter and even Kevon Looney, Nemanja Bjelica, they played big roles this year. They're unrestricted free agents. It remains to be seen if they'll come back. But you've got these young guys waiting in the wings, and you've got a third layer of guys like Moses Moody, who showed that they could play this year too, who's kind of your insurance policy for when they inevitably lose, Jordan Poole, because he's going to get a big contract here. They probably get one more season out of Jordan, and somebody's going to poach him away. It's the nature of being a high dollar sign, championship level team. But you're absolutely right. So one more championship is definitely realistic. And barring any sort of, catastrophic injury up and down to Curry and the rest of this crew, they're at least going to be in contention for a bit yet. And those numbers are going to keep climbing. So you don't want Steph in your top 10, fine, but you got about maybe 2 more years to even try to make that argument.
Right. I do also want to say, before we move forward to some of the interesting storylines going forward for this offseason, that I like any moment where I can feel good about something in sports because there's a lot of icky out there.
Yeah.
And it felt really good to see Klay Thompson be able to perform at a high level
Yeah.
in this series. You know, winning a championship clearly has already done it, but for him to be able to go through all those setbacks and for him to struggle when he was coming back and for him to be for he and the organization and for the trainers to be patient with this and to work on the slow comeback. They didn't try to rush anything. Granted, they had a wealth of resources to be able not to have to rush it for the team's sake. It was good to see him not only just win the ring, but more importantly, to be able to be a significant part of the reason that they were able to win the championship.
Yeah, he contributed, and a few other feel-good stories. You know, Andrew Wiggins rewrites his career narrative now in one season and really in one postseason. He goes from not a bust as a number one pick, but a perennial disappointment to a guy where he played an enormous role. He was their second most important player all season this year. He was their most important guy helping to keep the ship afloat last year. And it's huge for him. A guy like Andre Iguodala, this may have been the last NBA minutes we saw from Iggy, you know, unless he wants to go the Udonis Haslem route and act as a player coach, which there may still be a role for him in Golden State or anywhere else that he chooses to do that.
Maybe.
But meaningful minutes, you know, we at least got to see him once or twice in the finals and got a few minutes there. That may be it. You know, I look over at the Boston side, and in just one season, Ime Udoka has bought himself 3 future coaching jobs at the very minimum, because that's how NBA coaching works. So you think about like Doc Rivers has been thought of as a premier NBA head coach for a long time. A lot of that is earned with his win percentage, absolutely, but he got one championship.
15 years ago.
Yeah, and he was not on the scrap heap, but there was a lot of question marks after his initial tenure with the Orlando Magic when he first came into the league. He was a guy that as a player, a lot of people thought would make a pretty decent head coach. He got that shot in Orlando. It was ho-hum. There was no excitement when he was brought into Boston whatsoever, but he made it work, and he's been able to parlay that into a lot of other success. And you see, I think in a lot of ways, a similarity between Doc Rivers and Ime Udoka, although Ime had a longer assistant coaching span for himself. And here in year one, you win a championship. You can do a lot with that. So I'm happy for a guy like that. And, you know, the East is going to be tough. This is an off-season storyline that we'll dig into more. The East is going to be really, really tough. But Boston is going to be a huge part of what makes it that tough. They've got basically every key contributor under contract for next season. So the core is coming back. Brad Stevens seems to be active in the same way that Danny Ainge was. Now, this is assuming that Brad Stevens stays in the front office and doesn't get poached away to coach somewhere, whether it be Charlotte or Utah or a couple of places that have openings. We'll get to them. But if he stays, that's going to be an active front office, and Boston is, they're not going to go away. I mean, Milwaukee's going to be tough. Miami presumably sticks in there. Philly probably will get better. Brooklyn will try to reload and come back. Man, the East is scary.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I did want to say that I'll be interested to see how Boston starts next year, because they were so poor in their beginning of the season. And we talked about how hot they were after the beginning of the calendar year, that I feel like you saw Tatum and you saw Smart and you saw Brown. You saw those dudes who had to put a lot of miles on those legs to get back into the playoff race and to get into, you know, one of the top spots what they were in. That I would imagine that Ime Udoka learns from that this year, uses the beginning of the year to be much more load management type, which people hate, but like you won't, I don't think you'll see, and maybe they will be nearly as be much better coming out the gate, but I don't think you'll see a huge emphasis on trying to grind those guys like they had to essentially from January 1 to get to what they were, because they essentially could not have any days off. And now, like, I think what was this? The Jason Tatum had played, or Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, or maybe both of them had played like 105 games or something this year, and that is a ton of basketball to be able to play at that level, and not low on minutes either. Like tons and tons of minutes. I'll just sort of be interested to watch Boston come out the gate, but I'm with you. The East is going to be a bear to get through next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Look for Boston to try to grab a couple more veterans, guys that they can trust.
Well, they do have a a contract that they can pick up. What was it, from the Evan Fournier deal?
Mm-hmm.
Where what's it called? Was it the no trade exception? The part of the con?
Yeah, you get a trade exception when the salaries are imbalanced.
Yeah, so they could pick up a significant contract that did not hurt them against the salary this offseason, but they have to use it like in the next month or something, whatever that deadline is. But that they're going to be, at least you're going to hear their names looking at a few people, I would say, when at least in reporting, I would think.
Yeah, it'll be mid-level exception type of guys, not somebody that breaks the bank, but somebody that they can entrust some minutes to. And they really need one or two more players like that, ideally, for the exact reason that you just said.
I think you look at a point guard or something like that, for real.
Yeah, it's possible. Depends on how many minutes they want to hand to Peyton Pritchard and what they've got behind him. They did have to shuffle some of that depth out. We had said for a long time they had too much depth that wasn't usable. They had to shuffle some of that out in order to consolidate the roster at last trade deadline, which meant that they only had 8 or 9 guys that they really trusted in a pinch. And the deep
and one of those guys
benches,
like Pritchard, like you couldn't even put him on the court for the most part at the end of that series. So this offseason, figuring out what Peyton Pritchard especially would be for this team, Boston's a fascinating case to see how good again they can be, especially early next year. But I wouldn't be shocked if they were anywhere near what they were last season. But again, I was shocked where they were last season and the beginning of this season. So
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to move on to sort of offseason stories, but you want to wrap up?
No, I was heading that direction too.
All right, well, let's head there. Joel, I will be honest with you. Like, there are 0 storylines that are interesting to me except for one.
Okay.
Well, that's my New York Knicks picking up Kyrie Irving. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, Kyrie Irving and the Brooklyn Nets have not been exactly hitting on all cylinders, not only just lately, but seemingly forever. Kyrie Irving has come out and sort of, in the last couple of months, especially since the season ended for them, has been more, quote unquote, what you would think reflective of how he's sort of been interpreted by other people. And it looks like the Nets are not interested in giving him a big long-term deal, as Kyrie is expected to opt out of his player option for next season with Brooklyn to explore larger cash opportunities. And the New York Knicks, the future Eastern Conference champion New York Knicks, are rumored to be one of the teams very much interested in his services. Joel, I don't care about any other topic, even though I'll talk about it, even another topic except for Kyrie coming to the Knicks, because I hate that guy and I want him on the Knicks.
I was going to say, you sound oddly excited for somebody that does not like Kyrie Irving. And
I would take him in a heartbeat. I would take him in a heartbeat. I know everyone talks about like he sort of kills a locker room and a vibe and stuff, but you know what he does? He plays his butt off when he's on the court, and he makes your team better on the court. And no matter if he allegedly has practices on the side after practices that are already conducted by the coach himself, the Knicks don't have a guy like that, right? Like, as much as I like a guy like R.J. Barrett, right? Like, he's the only guy that's trusted by the head coach is 101 years old, okay?
You just hit the nail on the head for why this isn't going to work, though. Can you imagine Mr. Sensitive Kyrie Irving, Mr. Cerebral Kyrie Irving, Mr. I've got a bunch of different reasons and gripes for why I might not want to play Irving, being coached by Mr. Tom Thibodeau
for 1 year,
whose mantra will be that you will play, I will show up at your house, and, put you into the back of a van if I need to, and you're coming. Like,
hey, what makes you think Tom Thibodeau, Kyrie Irving couldn't be the Phil Jackson, Dennis Rodman?
Everything makes me think that, because Tom Thibodeau is not Phil Jackson, because Phil Jackson understood personalities and how to reach people. Tom Thibodeau says all NBA players must reach me where I am at, or I will quickly find your replacement. It's a totally different thing. The other thing that, on paper, Kyrie Irving to the Knicks would be the most Knicksiest thing ever. It would be potentially doable, but the amount of drama just gets even bigger if you're on the Knicks. The other thing is, if Kyrie is a little bit upset at the Nets don't want to give him a long-term thing, there's also got to be some leftover animosity towards the state of New York, city of New York, the mask mandates, and all the things that did not allow Kyrie to play. I would be surprised if he showed back up in New York if he decided it was time to go. I just think he winds up somewhere else.
There could be some residual anger of just the locale.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't hate it. That would be interesting, right? Like, because since then it's been relaxed, but maybe he's just like, look, because one of the other
talked many times about how he thought it was unfair and all that.
Well, one of the things that's been reported is that he'd go join LeBron again over in Los Angeles, and again, remember what I had prefaced this with: he's been reflective about how he has been perceived and what his culpability may have been in certain relationships breaking up. Like, let's put a big giant example on his time in Cleveland with LeBron James. And so maybe a reunion could be in order. There's a way financially it could work out.
It could, but you're going to need Russell Westbrook to opt out of an insane amount of money that he's not going to opt out of.
Russell Westbrook doesn't like money. That's what I hear.
The Lakers have way too many big contracts, especially if Russ is back on board. Most of the roster is unrestricted, but most of them were on minimum contracts last year because of how big your tickets are to LeBron and Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook when he opts in. So unless Kyrie is taking a sweetheart deal to show up and play there, which I wouldn't put that past Kyrie.
That's the weird thing. What can you put past Kyrie, right?
Exactly. I would put Russ giving up that money, especially given how rough things were last season. He's got to take the bag while it's still in hand. He can't do a bet on himself thing, because there's not a lot of teams that are going to bet on Russell Westbrook simply because of the headaches, because of the age, because of the declining production, the fact that he's not yet ready to assume that second chapter of his career. It's very clear in the way he talks about that. Now, maybe new Lakers coach Darvin Ham can get through to him and you see a career renaissance. Then after that, he'd be able to parlay his way into some nice longer deals, though nowhere near as big as what he's had. Kyrie, does he go on a goodwill tour and join the Lakers for 1 year with Russell Westbrook even there still? Like, no, I wouldn't put anything past him, but I don't know. I just don't see it. I have a buddy of mine who's a big Lakers fan, and he was asking me about that too. And I had to break the news to him that the Lakers and the Knicks will be the most active offseason teams every single offseason until the end of time, because that's where the biggest markets are. That's where the biggest readerships are.
So don't water this down.
This is 100% a thing. You will see the Lakers and the Knicks periodically, systematically floated next to every single big free agent this offseason, the same way it is every single year, because there's no penalty for saying sources say. There's no penalty for speculation. Right. And it sells. It gets you clicks, it gets you reads, it gets you video time, whatever you need to sell ad space. And people know that. And I worked in that system. It is a thing. So they're going to be active even when it makes no sense. People are going to try to have it make sense, and it just doesn't. If you want actually active teams to watch this offseason, keep your eyes on Atlanta. They're going to try to rebuild around Trae Young. John Collins, as good as gone. There's a couple of other Hawks who people
Bogdanovich probably could be
Bogdanovich, people are kicking the tires on him, on Kevin Huerter, on Clint Capella. Charlotte needs to find a head coach. If it's Mike D'Antoni,
Well, they
you
had one
might.
for a minute.
They did, and he decided to stay with the Warriors. Did Kenny Atkinson? Mike D'Antoni, I think, is way past his sell-by date. I don't love that idea. Atkinson made a whole lot more sense. But Mike D'Antoni getting one last go-round with an elite point guard in LaMelo Ball and trying to really juice up his career, that is intriguing. Charlotte actually in their 6-7 deep roster that they have has the pieces to play D'Antoni style ball. That will be interesting. If you're a Chicago Bulls fan, you are waiting with bated breath to see what happens to Zach LaVine. I think he does return, but he probably is going to have a lot of interviews and a lot of free agent visits with people at least.
I've read reports that he's planning to that they are expecting him to be able to expecting him to be a Chicago Bull next year. But I think you're right. He's going to be a very busy man.
I think he's twisting the screws not only to make sure he gets the maximum amount of money, but also to twist the Bulls' arm to lay out their plan of what they're going to do to continue to build around him and to make sure that they're not going to cheapskate, and just be happy with getting back to the playoffs. Other teams are going to be super active this offseason. The Indiana Pacers continue to try to blow things up. I know they're not a sexy team, but they've got a couple of players who, if in good spots, you think of Malcolm Brogdon, could be an absolute game changer on a contender. If you're the Milwaukee Bucks, please bring Malcolm Brogdon back. He was such a great fit with Giannis, and he is perfect for what you are trying to do there. You also have Miles Turner. He's been injured off and on, but he's also been leading the league in block shots off and on for the last couple of years. There's a lot to like there. They've got a lot of other pieces. Buddy Hield could get moved. TJ McConnell could get moved. Those are guys that you don't care about when they're in a Pacers uniform, but you might if they're on your team. Off-season news, I'll be watching with the LA Clippers. Paul George, is he healthy enough to play? Kawhi Leonard, is he healthy enough to be in the NBA anymore? What do you have there with the Clippers? Obviously, the Lakers are going to be really active, but we just talked about them. There'll be a lot going on there. New York, they'll be super active too. Oklahoma City has 10,000 draft picks in the NBA draft. They also have seemingly 100,000 rookies and second-year players on that team, many of whom can play. So how they package that and how many guys they try to stash overseas, or what in the world they're going to do with that embarrassment of riches, that's an interesting thing. DeAndre Ayton in Phoenix, do they give him the max? Why in the world do you have a max level player and you're talking about potentially not? Either there are major attitude red flags with Ayton, and we've seen some smoke on this over the years. But keeping in mind, this is also the Phoenix Suns, a team that has notoriously cheapskated during the Robert Sarver ownership, dating back to the Steve Nash teams and how good they could have been and how many players and picks they gave up on for no other reason than to save cash. That could be really, really interesting and potentially really damaging to somebody like Devin Booker's career and even the end of Chris Paul's tenure. I know you're a big Ayton guy, Arky. I wanted to give you a moment to chime in there before I get to the last of the active teams to watch this year.
Oh, I think Ayton. Listen, teams will always look for a reason to not pay a guy, right? At the max that they are due. But there is nothing that DeAndre Ayton has done on the court that should tell you he is not worth every penny of that. And, this is an interesting spot for Phoenix where they start getting into younger guys that start getting more and more worthy of the money that they are deserve it based on time, based on contracts that have been favorable to the team. If you start building up the Devin Booker contracts and adding on the Chris Pauls and DeAndre Ayton maxing out, now you go from a team that's been building for the last 4, 5, 6 years to a team now that has to sustain and maintain somehow, with now contracts being a huge deal when you're sort of paying attention. So I can agree. I understand trying to sort of puzzle piece the DeAndre Ayton piece, but DeAndre Ayton's not a guy you can afford to lose. You got to pay the guy. Like, he has earned every nickel of that max contract at this point, and I just don't see any way around it.
What do the Portland Trail Blazers do to try to retool around Damian Lillard? Do they give this one more go-around, or do they pull the plug during the offseason, maybe even on draft night? Watch out for that. They tried to reload around him last year. Then he was hurt. It didn't look great on the court, even during the few games that he did play. Guys like Joe Ingles, who's a free agent, could be a very nice piece for a team that's trying to pursue a championship. I want my Minnesota Timberwolves to go after Ingles, but don't be surprised if he winds up in a place like Boston, or Milwaukee, somebody like that who wants a good bench player. We talked about the Celtics needing somebody to kind of eat some innings for them and play decent basketball. Ingles, if healthy, I know it's a knee injury. If healthy, that could be a big pickup for them. But even somebody like Yusuf Nurkic very much reminds me of a younger Jonas Valanciunas. And Valanciunas is a valuable player. He's not a huge needle mover because, he gets you points and rebounds, but he's not stretchy. He's good enough on the defensive end, but there is a role for guys like that in the league. The Blazers might finally move on from Nurkic. There are teams like San Antonio, like Toronto, even like your New York Knicks, where he makes some sense. Similarly, the Sacramento Kings, they're under less of the gun because they don't have a huge player under contract that they're trying to figure out what to do with, but they're perpetually trying to rebuild. And a couple of guys like Harrison Barnes, Rashawn Holmes may find different, homes as veterans and could be very, very helpful to big name teams. I think we see the Utah Jazz, whatever's happening there, they don't have a coach yet. We haven't even heard names attached except for maybe the Brad Stevens, Danny Ainge connection, but that seemed very, very, very presumptive and speculative. But a lot of smoke around a Rudy Gobert trade, some smoke around a Donovan Mitchell trade. Basically, anybody on that roster is available right now. Make the right deal. And then the Washington Wizards, Bradley Beal, it sounds like will not opt in, and sounds like, and this has gone back and forth with lots of different reporting. There have been times that people are saying he was going to opt in. He was going to take the deal one more year. A lot of people are saying he'll opt out, but he wants to re-sign a longer-term deal in Washington. That would be the perfect type of time where, hey, if you're looking at Zach LaVine and you've got the money to go after LaVine, I understand he's a lot younger than Beal, but Beal's the flat-out better player. And I love Zach LaVine, but Beal is the better player. Just for how long?
I would say even at this point in their careers, like as far as like balancing that amount of money versus what you could have long term.
Yeah, Bradley Beal is almost 29. Zach LaVine is 27. The age difference is not that great.
It's not crazy, but again, like Bradley Beal's essentially been on a bench for 2 years.
There's been a lot of injuries, although some of that has had to do with Washington pulling the plug in the second half of seasons.
Some of the teams choosing to sit the guy, right? I get that. I totally get that.
Yeah, but you're right. There's been a lot of injuries that were unplanned, unmanaged that have happened here as well.
Sitting around like competitive basketball where?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, those are the teams and some of the players, and that's not even getting to the NBA draft. But as I've said before, like NBA draft for me, especially this year, this does not seem like one of those slam dunk number one pick type of situations. You're going back and forth between three different players: Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, and maybe Paolo Banchero. Jaden Ivey's in that mix a little bit too, but that'd be a big surprise. I think the betting
favorite right now is Jabari Smith to go number one overall.
Yeah, but there too, like, okay, he goes to Orlando. They have drafted some elite power forwards. Jonathan Isaac, Mo Bamba was supposed to be a power forward. They've gone that route, and nothing has panned out yet. Nobody. That's not going to move the NBA needle. If he goes number one to Orlando, everybody will go, yeah, cool, all right. Who's number two? Who's number three? What's the rest of the draft? When does my team come up?
Paolo Banchero's not 5 feet tall. Like he's not a point guard. And,
no. It's more that you don't.
Holmgren's nowhere near a point guard. Although that might move the needle just because he's 100 feet tall and shoots threes.
You just don't have that one player capturing the imagination, or the two players who are so neck and neck that it becomes that legit debate about who should go one, who should go two, where is the fit. Like, even dating back to, Kevin Durant and Greg Oden, a lot of people saw the warning signs, but it was a legitimate debate the entire time. And it was a legitimate disagreement when Odin went 1 and Durant went 2. Like, and a lot of that is hindsight, sure, but we don't have that type of race this year. It's good players.
I think the biggest question,
and it's landing spots that just aren't sexy either.
I think if you're going to talk about what is the biggest talking point is what to do with this big giant kid from Gonzaga. Like he scares people because he's so skinny and he has to put on weight, and he's not like 17, 18 years old. He's like 21 or something, 22. Like he's been around for a while. Maybe he's 20 or something. I think maybe he's 20. But he's not just, like, is he going to be able to put on weight? Does he work out? Like, does he worry you in a way that, you may have worried eventually, essentially about Yao Ming because he was so thin at first? And, we know obviously what Yao turned out to be, a Hall of Famer and stuff, but is he that guy? Plus he's this, kind of sideshow guy, right? Like a big 7-footer that shoots threes. Like, I think that's sort of
here's
the
why
discussion, not the, hey, was a 1-2, which one's the guy? You know what I mean? So I'm with you. I'm just, doing the whole yes and.
I would worry about Chet Holmgren if I have to pick one, or if my team's future is riding on his outcome in any way. That's going to be most teams who are picking in the top 3 or 4.
Sure.
But Oklahoma City has so many picks and so many prospects in-house already and coming down the pipeline, many of whom show so much promise but are weird, unconventional players where you still have to figure out what they're going to be. I mean, Josh Giddey, a perfect example. Alexei Pakashevsky, perfect example. Even Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like, it's such a 5-tool type of player, but we don't know what he's a master of yet. We just know he's a really good ball player who can play a bunch of different positions. Lou Dort came out of nowhere. Darius Baisley is really the only conventional pick they've had out of that entire group. And they have some need at center. Like, they had Isaiah Roby there, and they had a couple of other guys that they gave a shot to, but none of them look like long-term starters. They look like rotation players if they pan out. But if Chet Holmgren winds up in Oklahoma City, which I think is where he would and should go, and he doesn't pan out and is a bust, the Oklahoma City Thunder will keep moving on. There's enough insulation there and enormously low expectations right now. Plus that small market, it's not that big of a deal if he doesn't pan out. But if he does and becomes a really good player, you start to look at that roster and you start to see the foundations being laid for another Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Serge Ibaka, Jeff Green type of core, which is what they did, back in the day here. You can't say that about Orlando. Orlando needs to start winning sometime soon here. Houston has got their key pieces in the pipeline, and they're kind of looking for finishing touches, but they're also a much bigger market that's going to need to win sooner. So, yeah, if you're talking storylines, like, the draft has decent players, but it does really seem this year, and again, I am not an expert on this. I say that all the time.
I am.
But it does seem like there's so much interchangeability this year of different guys, where they could work, of what the needs are, and that does leach all the way up to the top 4 or 5 picks as well. And that could wind up being a very good draft in hindsight. Anecdotally, there's like 12 players named Jalen in this year's draft. It's freaking confusing to me, Jalen and Jaden.
Well, then there's guys like Jaden Ivey, right? Like that. Right. Like he's really, really good. I've really liked him for a long time too. So I'll just say this, and we don't have to really sort of get too much deeper into it because the draft is, as you're listening to this, whatever, Thursday night, tomorrow night, as we're recording. I think the star power is Paolo Banchero as well as Chet Holmgren. Like, as far as, like, if you wanted to sell some tickets, I'd like to buy tickets. Jabari Smith, I think, is the best of the 3 players, the most NBA ready. I think the one that can make the biggest difference on your team as soon as you start camp. And I think that's why he'll go number 1. But as far as the star power early, like, Banchero had like 1,000 games at Duke on national television, and Chet Holmgren was a media darling because, people have been following him since he was in 8th grade because he's been such this this I don't want to use the F word, the freak, like this athletic freak, like that no one sees, like a 7-footer shooting threes, right? And he's not like a game program 7-footer. He is a tall fella, right? So like there's very much interest in that because again, it's a rarity kind of thing. And then Jabari Smith's just the best player of the three. So, and I think he'll be a star, and I don't know about superstar, but I think he'll be really, really good in the league. But
Orlando has wrecked guys like that in the past.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
They have wasted those guys, unfortunately.
Yeah. So this podcast was going to change dates coming up soon, probably this week, actually. But we may start dropping these on Sundays instead. A timing issue makes more sense. Plus the off season, and we'll be few and further between. I'm telling you, I'm sweating. It is too hot in Alabama. I don't know what it is. Ooh, it is hot. I'm dying. But that's for you, lovely people who get to watch on the YouTube. You get to check me fanning myself. Ooh, Lordy.
If you want to flee from YouTube with that visual, you got Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts.
I do declare I'm getting a little bit glimpse with the heat. So I'm getting the vapors.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so probably this Sunday or next Sunday, you'll see this podcast drop. As long as you're subscribed, you'll see the feed update, and maybe you'll be surprised as far as when we get this. But we'll start getting into off-season stuff because it's the off season, so that makes sense. And by the way, I do love how the NBA, as soon as the season was over, wasted zero time, getting into Kyrie stories, sort of making the rounds. It's like good.
It's weird how that happens, right?
Yeah, it's like they know. We're gonna do everything we can not to lose your attention.
You'll hear from us. You'll hear from Kyrie. You'll hear plenty of Russell Westbrook. Thanks, Russ, for lending your name to the episode. And you'll see us. Yeah, Sunday we'll be talking post-draft stuff. Looking forward to it.
Joel, say goodbye to the people.
Goodbye to the people.